Hello. I know I can see. Here can, here we go. I'm not super great at this stuff, so here we go. Everybody see my screen? Brian, can you
Yep,
see my screen?
yep, there we
Okay,
go, John.
perfect, perfect. Well, we'd like to welcome everybody today to the end of the year uh, transplant laser at renewal presentation. Brian and I have been giving this presentation together for I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And it's very helpful to people that have a transplant laser that was identified through the renewal process. Now, this presentation isn't always just slanted towards, consultants and health plans. There's a lot of MGUs and case managers on the line today with us. So if you have a question, you can always just type it in on your screen, type in a question. Brian and I will be looking for those as we go through. This is a 1/2 hour presentation, and what we're going to be talking today about is how to set a reasonable renewal laser. And because sometimes people say, well, get us to the right laser. Well, the right laser can vary by different type of persons. And so if you're a reinsurance carrier, obviously that's one thing. If you're somebody else, that's something different. So let's go through and start walking our way through this. This is how INTERLINK supports its clients through the laser process. And first thing we do is we do laser setting. A lot of times health plans will call up and they have an expected transplant and they've going through the underwriting process and they've been presented with like an $800,000 laser for a potential transplant. And so they and their consultants are reaching out to us to say, can you help us work our way through that? Often we work with case managers or we'll work with like an MGU or reinsurance carrier because these can be laser, client losing situations. So let's talk about incentives. We're going to talk a little bit about incentives today. Reinsurers offer incentives for cancer and transplant narrowing, and we can share what the market is offering right now. We're going to be talking about needed information. To get to an equitable laser, you need to have access to some really cool and unique information, and INTERLINK is the only one that can provide this for you because of things that we've been doing for years. And then lastly is come up with a long-term solution. If you're a consultant and you're going back to the MGU or the reinsurance carrier and say, hey, look, I've been working with INTERLINK on this laser, they would be more motivated to help if the plan went through and said, well, we're going to put in a long-term solution at the same time. They probably would be more receptive to your conversation. There's really 3 steps to our presentation today. The first thing we're going to talk about is INTERLINK's 4-step transplant laser process. Ryan's going to go through and talk with a little bit about how you might control it more long-term using INTERLINK's performance model and narrowed networks. And then lastly, we're going to talk about capturing a plan incentive using an intent to install form. So we're going to start off by establishing the right or equitable laser. Now, right is really hard to define. If it's too high, it puts lots of stress on the health plan. Imagine if you were a chief, financial officer with a health plan, and when you're working with the consultants as a CFO, I would say, well, what would be my exposure on any one case? And they would say your exposure on any one case would be $75,000 because that's the individual stop loss deductible. And I would look at my bank accounts and my finances, and I would come by and I would say, the plan can afford that. Okay. And that all sounds great because that is in fact a true statement. The problem is that in the transplant world, for liver transplants, for an example, there is a 9-month wait from the time that it's typically discovered to the time of transplant. And so what it's going to do is it takes something identified in November, which probably will transplant in probably July of the following year. And this is what triggers the laser. is that it's no longer an unknown risk, it is a risk. So as a CFO, I hear back from the renewal process that the renewal is only 8%, but there is an $850,000 laser for one of my patients, and this causes an enormous amounts of stress. But here's the alternative. If the laser is too low, then the reinsurer is assured a loss. Let's say that somebody says, okay, well, you should keep it at 75,000. Well, it's a known expense to the plan of probably, even after contracts, if things go well, of probably about $600,000. So it's an assured loss for the reinsurer. So let's kind of walk through a process that INTERLINK can provide that may lead to the equitable laser for both the reinsurer and the health plan. Now, the cool thing is that with INTERLINK's data, we can set and now adjust lasers up and down, taking into consideration transplant team experience and competency and patient-specific information. So our strategy is we're going to walk you through these 4 steps. And the first thing we're going to do is take you to the absolute ceiling, is that there would probably be no sense in charging more than this. And then we're going to bring you down to the very bottom, is what is the minimum. And then we're going to adjust up based off of some other, patient-specific risks and surgical team risks. Let's explore this a bit further. So you're going to use national projected cost, facility-specific rates, surgical team transplant risks, patient-specific risk, and you're going to come up with a client-led eraser. So here we go. Now, let's start off with pass number 1. That's a Milliman USA cost projections. This is not an INTERLINK generated document or numbers. We're going to talk about those. Pass number 2 would be INTERLINK negotiated specific case rates for that organ type at the facility in question. Pass number 3 would be using our performance modeling transplant risk assessments for the transplanting team. And then lastly, we're going to use another tool that INTERLINK offers. This is called our quick reference guides, or our QRGs. Now, this is a document on the left-hand side. It's downloadable. Anybody on this line today can go up and search for this very document, and it is probably up there. Milliman is the generator, Milliman Consulting. And the primary purpose of this document is that each and every year, underwriters are going to generate what the new cost of a plan is. Now, some people think, well, they said, well, I think we should give it 5% more, Bob, or, 8%, 12%. It's actually, health plans are actually built from the bottom up almost each and every year. And this document, it's a paid service. So year 1, it goes off to, those who paid for it. And what they're going to do is they're going to take the transplant numbers, they're going to figure out what the frequency is plus the expected cost. That's how it goes forward. Now, if we were to look at page 4, I think this is page 4 in this document. This is actually the estimated US average 2020 billed charges per transplant. Now, I would like to make a statement here, is that these are unadjusted. Even at the beginning of almost all of the Milliman documents that I've seen, so there is a proviso that says that these are the base numbers. Now, depending on the contracts that your health plan may have, or they strongly recommend that anybody reading this associate with one of the 5 transplant centers of excellence networks, because there are case rates that can change these numbers dramatically. But let's kind of walk through it as an example, and let's use liver transplants as the example. We go across here. These are the different components that would total up into your transplant. You have 30 days pre-transplant, that's 46,200. Organ procurement cost of 104,200 on average. There's the hospital admission for 490,600 on average. transplant doctors and all the professional fees total almost $60,000. $140,200 for 180 days of follow-up care, $38,000 for suppression, which actually brings us to the highest number that probably would be in any kind of a laser, which would be 878,400. So if you were a health plan, if you see this number, well, of course we could do better than that. And you probably would want to check in with your centers of excellence provider. So now that we've established the ceiling, never charge more than that, now we're going to talk about setting the floor. And this is something that you would never charge less than, because this would be the lowest rate conceivable. And this is a sample contract rate summary from INTERLINK at the University of Utah Hospitals and Clinics for Liver Transplant. So let's kind of walk through some of these numbers. The first number that we need to pay attention to is this $135,590 rate. And this is the case rate for a cadaveric donor liver transplant at this facility. It's good for 20 days of inpatient hospital care, which is pretty solid. And if they go beyond the 20 days, we're going to pay $2,386 for that. Now, the transplant phase includes hospital and professional charges for the inlier days. The thing it doesn't include would be organ acquisition charges, which are reimbursed at the invoice cost that the hospital gets. Now, you're going to have to call, your account manager, and we can get you this information. But if we added all of this up, the floor becomes $220,000 because it's $135,900, which is the case rate for hospital and professional. Invoice cost at this facility is for $85,000, so it's a total of $220,000. And so that's just something to think about. This is now the floor. Now we're going to be doing some adjustments based off of the surgical team. Brian's going to cover our performance model with you briefly, but basically what INTERLINK does is that we take the transplant outcome data for each and every transplant that occurs in the United States, send it off and have it risk adjusted. And what we do is we study transplant teams now, and that is how we credential teams into our program. Now, we have two different types of meters, shown here. On the left-hand side, this is for the University of Chicago for their liver transplant program. In our performance model, there's 100 potential points. Out of this, the lowest one studied was 47.73, which was actually this particular program. In other words, our outcome estimation would be guarded. We look at they have plenty of volume. You'll find them in everybody's centers of excellence. The problem is that their outcomes are worse than expected. On the other side of it, here's our University of Utah. Once again, we have, all the volume requirements are fully met. Outcomes are way better than expected. So in this one, we would be optimistic. So how would you use this in adjusting a laser? Well, we have a patient going to the University of Utah. We know it's not going to be 870, but probably not 220. You probably want to increase it some. If we knew that the surgical team was quite capable and we're optimistic about it, we may raise it up 50, 75,000. If you are guarded, you may raise it 200,000 or 300,000, or maybe even a little bit more on top of the case rate, just to make sure that you're adjusting it appropriately for surgical team competency. And the last thing we would do is a tool of INTERLINKs that we would use would be our quick reference guide. And these are about 8 pages long, each one, and it talks about all different types of things that are related with transplants. And each one, there would be a liver quick reference guide, and there would be a heart quick reference guides. And what we would be looking for is section 4, potential complications. So if we know that the patient is coming in and they're still drinking and they need a liver transplant, that's a potential complication. If they're, their MELD score is very, very high, that would be an indication of potential complications. And that would have to be folded in on top. So let's say that a patient is going to the University of Utah, got the ceiling and the floor. We adjusted it up a little bit just to give ourselves a little bit of comfort, but we find out that they have these personal complications. We may need to yet make another raise for that. But these are some of the cool tools that we offer. So pass one was getting the ceiling estimate. Two, getting the floor from INTERLINK's performance model. Here's the performance model, and then here's the laser adjustments for patient-specific risks. So this is uniquely INTERLINK, and we're pretty proud of what we have to offer you, and we think we could be very helpful. So I'm going to transfer it over to Brian now for a while, and he'll walk you through what the performance model is and how if you're going to ask an underwriter or ask a reinsurer, an MGU, to make an adjustment, or if you're an MGU and you're really trying to get that final sales closed with a large client, and have a few of these lasers out, you're probably going to say, hey, look, we can meet you there, but we would like you to put in a transplant network, a narrow transplant network, so we don't have these kind of issues in the future. So turn it over to Brian.
Yeah, thanks, John. I appreciate. Yeah, so before we kind of jump into the performance model, I did want to kind of give you a little bit of background about how INTERLINK even got here. As many of you know that have worked with us for many, many years, we've been an outcomes-based transplant network since day one, sending people towards the right provider at the right time, and then layer around a good case rate contract. That's really been our message. But 12 years ago, John was actually asked to be part of a panel of consultants that dealt with the Walmart health plan. A bit controversial at the time, but they all met out in Chicago in a big roundtable section. And Walmart was looking at channeling all of their transplants throughout all their members all across 50 states to one of the 3 Mayo clinics. And again, as kind of an industry expert, John was there to kind of talk about, is this the right move or not? We've always been big into channeling. This was really kind of the first, aha moment that we kind of saw with a very large client looking to do this. So everybody went around their table, said their pros and cons, and John was there to really kind of talk openly about, if you want to go down this path, the Mayo Clinic is phenomenal, but they're not phenomenal at everything. If you really want to narrow and literally send patients across the country from Florida to Oregon, DC to California, Mayo's a great option. But if you're really looking at getting the best, there are better options. So, really from that meeting, John brought it back to the management team and ultimately really birthed our performance modeling program. And as many of you know that have been an INTERLINK client for many, many years, this is really where INTERLINK, I think, cuts its teeth, separates itself, and brings value to a lot of our clients. Now, I started with INTERLINK in 2010, 12 years ago. When I started here, 100,000 live commercial population averaged about 14 transplants. That was kind of the going rate. If you fast forward 12 years, we just looked at recent data, it's 16 transplants for 100,000 for commercial population. So, it's a very controlled environment. Utilization of transplants really hasn't blown up like maybe a cancer or other type of very catastrophic diseases. So performance modeling like this makes total sense. And I would say over the last 2 or 3 years, maybe through COVID or not, but we have seen a big shift, especially on the employer side, looking at narrowing networks and channeling patients to the right care. So I'll kind of give you a little example about how we got here. So everybody knows the University of Chicago is a powerhouse. I think John was there in the early days of developing centers of excellence. University of Chicago was a powerhouse. They dominated. They were a huge name. And fast forward 30 years, they're still in everybody's network. But as you can see here, and John illustrated before, a lot of their programs really aren't up to snuff. And so 7 or 8 years ago, INTERLINK kind of abandoned the centers of excellence model. COEs have been around for years. There's essentially 300 plus that you can channel patients to. And we really adopted the programs of excellence, or really looking at how each of these programs are performing, because that's really where clients want us to get. How well is the kidney program performing? How well is the liver? Not just sending everybody to Chicago because they're a COE. So with that, we developed these performance overview reports. These are really the kind of gold that a lot of our clients want. And so this is what our reinsurance carriers kind of covet. They really want to make sure that people are sending patients to providers that have low wait times, high outcome performing, good contracts, managing wait list, have sufficient volume. And this is really all the data that we have in-house that we bring back to our clients. You can see here, we're kind of highlighting the University of Chicago. Their kidney program actually was the worst of all the ones that we performed, not kind of throwing shade at them. but you can see here that their average wait list was over 6 years for transplantation. That's not uncommon out there. Kidney management wait lists is always a big issue. You get a dialysis. But this is where, as far as a go-forward plan, if you've got a laser, if you have a client that wants to narrow, wants to get a good, this is where we really, truly can show value for you and your clients.
Not only are the outcomes not great at this facility, Um, but Brian is showing you this is actually what would go out to a patient and say that we say, oh, we don't know where they're going to go. We definitely wouldn't recommend here because the average wait for a kidney transplant is greater than 72 months, which is a huge dialysis. But this is how the performance model scored all of the University of Chicago, which was not friendly.
Yep. And so John kind of showed you a snippet of kind of what we publish back to our clients. This is really an expanded list. It's based on livers, and essentially it ranks all of the programs that we looked at, some in Interlink's network, some in not, but this really gives you an idea about the various tiers, and you see elite, select, and quality. This really breaks down the top 10%, the top 25%, the top 40%, which we kind of classify as elite, select, quality. And this is where we start getting creative and customizing network providers and narrowing for clients. Some clients we work with go the regional route. If they have a lot of coverage in the state, they go the state route. And a lot of clients we've had that have gone reference-based pricing. We have a big employer clients that's big reference-based pricing. They send people all across the country. It's great working with those people to get creative. And then kind of just to expand on that, we ultimately build these kind of network models out here, give them back. And then ultimately the plans themselves can kind of package it up with this renewal and hopefully hand over a very worthwhile solution for their reinsurance or MGU. Because again, I work with all the major reinsurance carriers out there. We work with the MGU population as well. This is what this group loves to see. Underwriters love to see groups, take some of this catastrophic risk and really truly manage it. This is like music to their ears. And so we've been really working hard, especially through COVID, to kind of get in front of those TPAs, get in front of those brokers who deal with the day-to-day interactions, these employers, and kind of say, hey, this is really where you need to be. This is attainable stuff. You're a commercial member. You can go across state lines. 80% of transplants go to the local in-network provider just down the road. Our industry moves at a snail's pace, but we are starting to see some changes here, and the employers are really starting to buy into this concept.
Mhm. For visual, if you were to performance narrow and you're looking at a kidney network, this is the widest performance network, and you can see the number of facilities that would be offered. It's not ultra narrow. This is the mid-size one, the top 25% of the United States. And this is a visual representation of what Transplant Elite would look like, or the top 10%.
Yep. Now, if you're asking yourself, how's the member involved with this? How do we work with the members? If they're crossing state lines or going across the country, why are they doing that? John mentioned before that these data fact sheets that we're showing you here are baked into something called candidate education booklets. And for anybody on the line that submitted a referral to INTERLINK, we've had these available for 15 years. It's a simple checkbox in the referral form. It comes in a solid organ and bone marrow transplant. This is really the Bible for these patients. Obviously, it's made to work back through the case managers, and it gives them really all the tools and resources about why they're leaving suburban Chicago, Illinois, and they have University of Chicago just 20 minutes away, and maybe why they're going to the Mayo Clinic in Arizona because they have a 6-year wait list for a kidney transplant or a 14-month wait list. This is really the hard data that we've kind of built and we want to package. I mean, consumers are a lot smarter these days. They have access to all these things. These are tools and resources. These have been great things to have that really bring a lot of help to our patients that we go with through the process.
If you look at this is for a kidney transplant. And here, this is at the Mayo Clinic Foundation in Minnesota. The average wait there for a kidney transplant is 17 months, which, if you were into dialysis or really helping your members, that is a big, big step forward.
Yeah, and John mentioned this before, this intent to install document. And again, not going back to kind of the reinsurance population, but this is really what the reinsurance carriers are looking for. Trust me, this is what these underwriters want to see from their clients that they're quoting, that they're incumbent business on. And this was a document that we published, I don't know, it's been 6-7 years that we've had it out in circulation. We typically sell it through the TPA channel. These are folks that are placing reinsurance a lot of time on behalf of their clients. we work with the TPAs. We figure out how creative the employers want to get, where their population is, what centers make sense, where they want to put risk and kind of have options. And John's kind of highlighted there the three networks that we offer. We build it up, package it, and ultimately, have that there as a renewal document. And a lot of the time, reinsurance carriers will discount or credit for it. I mean, they want to see this stuff. And so this is the document that really brings it full circle.
It's just the more tightly you narrow, they asked us to break this out for them. Are you going to do the top 10%, 25 or 40%? It's just a great thing to offer. So now you come down to, well, what are the next steps? I mean, what would you do now? And I guess if you're Interlink client or you're not currently an Interlink client, there's different pathways that you would go, but all of them involving you to reach out to account management pretty much. Because if you are an Interlink client, you have access to our rates online already, and you could go pull a rate yourself and you can get Milliman yourself. But the transplant performance and modeling tools, you're going to have to call, and because those are we don't post those up on our websites, and you can get surgical team competencies, and then you could be working and getting a QRGA to try to understand what might increase the risks there. But if you're not an Interlink client, then we suggest that you reach out to Cassandra VanDyke, Assistant Vice President Account Management at this number. We may ask you sign a participation agreement because sometimes we are talking about patient specific information and we will need that put into place, but they're going to get all the rates for you and they're going to get all the modeling tools for you. It doesn't take a long time to do that, and the impact can be enormous.
Yep, agree.
So we said this is going to be a half hour. I think we have like 3 to 4 minutes left before we're done. So we'd like to open it up for any kind of questions that may be out there and that people may want to ask us. So here's one here, and this one comes in, and it's hard to tell what kind of a client it is, but it's basically they're in the renewal process. The numbers have already been exchanged, and it seems like there's been some pushback, but no resolution. What do you do from here? Well, the first thing I would do is, depending if you're a client, non-client, is to reach out to Interlink Account Management and kind of discuss what kind of information that you need to kind of go forward. Because sometimes no means no, and sometimes no means based off the
Mhm.
information you've given me, we're not willing to budge. And so that would be my recommendation at this particular point. So Brian, do you see a question out there?
Yeah, I've got one. There were a couple I was just kind of cherry picking a little bit. And this is one that I certainly welcome your comments on it. It's probably from a reinsurance carrier or an MGU, kind of based on how it's structured. Obviously, the CAR T movement is well aware. In the marketplace, we're seeing more of that come up as a first line therapy or a second line. Um, are we, lasers are being set. What's Interlink's kind of value add or strategy with dealing with some of these CAR T cases that are running, north of $1 million?
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is the transplant laser
Oh,
presentation.
well,
Just
that's fair.
kidding. No, these are actually um, we can actually work with those too. Same
Yeah.
same process. We wouldn't have the surgical team thing. It would be more of a numeric approach because I
Yep.
think CAR Ts have capitated payments for the actual drugs and biologics, and then like a 40 to 45% discount actually on the hospital thing. But once again, I think the way to get access to that information is to reach out to account management, um, fill out a kind of a notification form that we require, and then you get the rates back. And I think sharing the rates back with the reinsurer or the health plan may help you find resolution. So,
Okay. Yeah. Perfect.
um, let me look down here. Let's take this one. The patient doesn't know where they're going, so it's impossible for us to set up a case rate. I mean,
Yeah.
how do we start? Kind of thing. And this is tough. probably 90% of all the patients will go to the transplant center closest to where they live. And what I would recommend is to make a referral into INTERLINK. If you're if you're an existing client, just go up, look at their different rates, look at the one closest to there, make a referral. There is no cost to you to do that. Make the referral, but then ask us to put a little check mark for a candidate education booklet, and we'll put in that one, the rates for that one. Plus, we'll put in the outcome fact sheets for probably some great, maybe elite centers that are around them. And this is to be shared with the members and try to get them to attach to something other than just the closest place to where they live.
Yep,
But those numbers could be used. It just depends on the performance modeling about where they're going, about how that'll all play out. But that is a very good question, actually,
exactly.
because we
Perfect.
don't really know what to do yet. Okay, well, I think we've reached the end of the hour, or the half hour.
Yeah,
It's been our pleasure. INTERLINK, we're kind of proud of the tools we put together. Um, these can be very helpful to people as they go through the renewal process. You know, I have a finance background, and I can just easily put myself in a chief financial officer's shoes and trying to figure out what am I going to do now. So with that, Brian, you got any closing thoughts?
yeah. I was just going to add, transplants are very financially supported documents. Like I said, I think a lot of the stuff is the status quo. We are seeing a shift in that. So we are certainly on the cutting edge to jump on that. And certainly, if you have clients that are asking those questions, we're the solution partner that's happy to help.
Uh, that's a nice little way to wrap it up, Brian. So with that, we're going to say goodbye. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Appreciate your time.